we reach the end. After 39 days of exploring all of the books of the Old Testament, finally we reach the book of Malachi, and the curtain comes down, as in our Bibles at least, we reach the end of what we call the Old Testament. The book of Malachi. We've traced from creation all the way down to exile, and now the people of God are returning back to the promised land, back to Jerusalem. Malachi comes after Haggai and Zechariah. He's decades later, actually, closer to the time of Ezra, and many of his themes are similar to those we find in Ezra, all about obedience to the Torah. So we're later than Haggai and Zechariah and dealing with some of the themes we find in Ezra and Nehemiah. Chapter 1 is all a story about how things aren't as good as they should be. God says, "From the rising of the sun to its setting, my name is proclaimed among all the nations." And yet, on my home territory with Israel, things aren't great. People are cutting corners, they're selling themselves short, and they're selling me short. And so, chapter 2 reminds us a bit of Deuteronomy. It's a call to obedience and a reminder of the blessings that flow from obedience and of the curses that are a result of disobedience. It's like reminding us of the end of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the end of the book of Deuteronomy, saying to the people of God, come on. Honor your God. God is faithful to his covenant. He's keeping his covenant, but he's not lowering the bar. So raise your game and keep the Torah. Honor God through the way you live. But that's not where Malachi leaves us. There's more. And in chapter 3, it begins by talking about the coming of a messenger of God. Malachi means my messenger, one who will prepare the way. And then in chapter 4, we read of the day of the Lord, all about judgment, how evil will be burnt up. But more than that, there'll also be restoration. The Son of Righteousness will come with healing in his wings. This kind of judgment isn't just a punishment for wrongdoing. It's a making new, a restoration, a breathing of life back into all that has been oppressed, a giving back all that has been taken away. There's freedom here. And then the book of Malachi ends with reference to Moses, of course, representing all of the law, and to Elijah, the one who never died but was taken up to heaven, the one who will return, a reference to all of the prophets. So to the law, relationship with God and others, and to the prophets, this story of turning aside from doing wrong and coming back to God and looking to the future in hope. So we have then freedom or restoration in this one who will be like the Son of Righteousness, a reminder to keep the law of Moses, and then a reminder to honour the prophets by taking seriously all that they have said and constantly looking forward to the day when God's restoration is made real. So then Malachi, rather than a bringing down of the curtain at the old end of the Old Testament, it's actually like raising a curtain. As Malachi says to us, look out to the future. Look for the coming of God, the one who will bring this freedom, this restoration, this deliverance. And as you watch and as you wait, keep the law and take seriously the words of the prophets, the warnings against judgment, but also the encouragement to hope, to trust in God, whose promises are always yes. And of course, for us who are Christians, to leave the story at the end of the Old Testament here will lead straight into the ministry of Jesus. This talk of Moses and Elijah, well, Jesus will, of course, say early on in his ministry, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. And when he stands on the mountain and is transfigured, who's on either side of him? That's right, Moses and Elijah. But all that's to come. For now, let's hear again the message of Malachi, to look for that day of freedom, that day of righteousness, to gaze into the future, not kind of crossing our fingers and hoping for the best, but confident in the hope that God gives to us. And as we turn to the New Testament, we'll find out how that hope is made secure and indeed made possible in and through the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. So the end of the Old Testament, not an ending at all, but rather an encouragement to look forwards to all that is to come.